My high school football team, I mean, we all like our high school alma maters, but I had never experienced anything like this. So it was really bizarre to me. And then, I worked at a bar part-time too, and to hear all of these old guys talking about, their touchdown that they made in 1842,
still good old days.
Yeah, still hanging on to the glory days. I started just seeing the importance that this community held for not the sport, but for the notoriety, I guess, that you got from being on the team. So, it just was always really weird to me. I never understood it.
Hi, Gillian here, and this is Let the Women Do the Work, the podcast where we look at true crime from the perspectives of the women involved. Now, as we've mentioned thus far in the series, women are often cordoned off as a class of victims in the true crime world. A, because it happens. Women are still disproportionately victims of violent crime. And B, because we're still working with a flawed, sexist world out here. Gender tropes are tempting storytelling vehicles, and we see them all the time. So for this episode, I spoke with someone who cracked a case wide open, along with the misogyny at the heart of the conversation around it. Her name is Alexandria Goddard. She's a legal consultant and crime blogger who caught wind of a horribly disturbing story back in 2012. She was living in California at the time when she came across a story about something that had happened where she used to live, a small city in eastern Ohio called Steubenville. And content warning, listener, this case concerns sexual assault, so take care if this is a triggering topic for you.
I describe it as it's one of those days where you've reached the end of the internet and you're looking for things to do. And so I was like, I wonder what's happening in Steubenville. And it just so happened the day that I clicked on the news domain that the boys had been arrested. The news article was basically 4 sentences. There was nothing in there other than 2 boys had been arrested. I don't even think they identified them as football players, but they were Steubenville Big Red students. And so I thought, something's going on here. And I just did some research.
On the night of August 11th, 2012, Steubenville high school students convened at a few end-of-summer parties. And they left a digital paper trail to prove it.
Tweets, photos, and videos possibly document a crime from that night, an alleged sexual assault of a seemingly intoxicated, unconscious, underage teenage girl by members of the high school football team, an assault that other partygoers allegedly watched and later shared details online. This tweet from a partygoer reads, "Song of the night is definitely Rape Me by Nirvana." Other tweets call the girl sloppy and talk about a dead body, referring to the girl's state of unconsciousness.
The victim was known only as Jane Doe. And a few days later, her mother filed a report with police. And about a week after that, sophomores Trent Mays and Malik Richmond were arrested and charged with rape and kidnapping. But I want to be clear from the top here. There were bystanders everywhere that night, lurking in the backgrounds of photos, commenting and posting throughout the incident, even laughing about it. They were laughing about it. It's disgusting. There's an infamous video that made its way to YouTube from that night. It shows other kids at one of these parties gathered around talking about what Trent and Malik did to this girl. Given their tone, you'd think they were discussing a successful senior prank, not the direct violation of someone's body and life. The ringleader of this conversation in the video was a kid named Michael Nodianos, the same person who shot out the tweet joking that Rape Me by Nirvana was the song of the night. A tweet reposted by Trent and many others. And not for nothing, but do we think these idiots could even comprehend what that song actually says in the first place? Yeah, my vote is no. I say all this to show you, dear listener, that this terrible incident existed in a convoluted web of complicity. It spread beyond the 2 arrested, to their teenage peers, and eventually to adults in the community too. Because this was the start of football season, and with 2 starting players down for the count over these allegations, many in the town would rush to question Jane Doe's story instead. Even though she was the one harmed, these boys played the sport that gave Steubenville its collective identity, its sense of purpose. Alexandria is from Ohio originally, and she moved back following a divorce to be close with her mom, who lived in Steubenville. Alexandria was there for about 5 years, and there were lots of things that didn't quite click for her about the town. Most notably, its obsession with high school football.
when I moved there, I had gotten a job at the hospital, at the emergency room, and I worked the graveyard shift there as a ward clerk. And so, with all patients coming in, and I remember I hadn't been there very long, and I had gone back to the nurses' locker room, and I noticed that there were all of these posters, like homemade posters and balloons and glitter. And, there were these two different teams. And I'm just like, it looked like a high school locker room. And I remember I walked out and one of the ER doctors, I asked him, I'm like, what, who is Big Red? And, what is a Central? I'm thinking this is like, some professional football or sports team. And he's like, oh, well, that's the high school teams. And I remember standing there looking at him like, okay, there are women that work here who are old enough to be my mom, who are running around, with buttons on and their lockers are decorated, and they're doing all this over high school football. So it was really just weird to me that this was even going on, because at the time, I think, I've been out of high school for at least 10 years, and I was not going to do cartwheels down the hallway for my high school football team. I didn't give a shit, but they were like, it was crazy. And I just remember thinking, this is just bizarre. Like, I'd never seen adults act this way about high school football. They glorify these players. And so I knew that there was probably more to the story than what local news was reporting.
And so from across the country, Alexandria got to work, blogging and digging. Hey girl, Daily Harvest is back.
Look, fam, we gotta talk about the takeout temptation.
Yeah, you know how I'm always hungry.
I know.
Okay?
I do know that about
but
you.
But I'm trying to save a little bit of money these days because I can't order out all the time. So that's where Daily Harvest comes in, because I also have a freezer full of Daily Harvest.
But the thing about Daily Harvest, it's nutritious, it's organic, it's vegan, and it's made in like a minute, and it's made for any meal of the day. So I have my smoothie for breakfast, or I have my oat bowl.
Right.
I've been eating the soups or the flatbreads for lunch. There's so many options, and it's delicious and filling and good for you. It's not the pizza that I would get otherwise.
Yeah, 6 days a week. Not right. That's the thing. I really want to focus on the filling part, because I feel like this is something. Okay, you take it out of your fridge, you put it in the blender, or you heat it up, whatever, and you feel like, no, there's no way that feeds you like a meal. There's no way that you feel like, I had a great lunch, now I'm ready for the day. The thing is, you do, and because it's organic fruits and vegetables, and because it's lighter and healthier for you, I don't feel like I also have to take a nap after eating the full pizza.
1,000,000%, though, I am nap positive. Let me tell you, new to the scene, fam, is the delicious Harvest Bakes. These are for those moments where you're looking for homemade feels without any of the work. These are ready-to-bake, veggie-packed dishes, sizzling with gourmet-level flavors that are big enough to share. You just won't want to.
Yeah, so avoid the takeout temptation and get Daily Harvest. Go to dailyharvest.com/work to get up to $40 off your first box.
That's dailyharvest.com/work for up to $40 off your first box. dailyharvest.com/work.
Yeah, it lives in your freezer, and not in a creepy way.
No.
In the delicious, organic way.
Totally.
Get into it. So Alexandria was in California, dissatisfied by the immediate coverage of the story. She could sense it was complicated with lots of players in the mix. She could also sense that if someone didn't cover what happened, it could all get swept under the dirty patriarchal rug. And with it, justice for Jane Doe.
I went to the high school football roster, and the names were out there. And so I started pulling, I don't even know what it's called, like the first string of football. This is how much I know about sports.
Yeah, you're asking the wrong gal. Yeah, something like that.
So I started pulling some of the top names and looking for their social media. And all of them had their full names on their Twitter accounts. So it wasn't even like they were using, football stud 27. It was, they were using their full names. And I started seeing a lot of really horrible comments.
Comments like the ones responding to a photo of Trent and Malik holding Jane Doe by her limbs as they carried her, intoxicated and unconscious, from location to location. Here are some examples. Never seen anything this sloppy, LOL. It's a real tweet. And whores are hilarious. It's another real comment. Here's another one. Some people deserve to be peed on. And finally, this is a direct quote, if they're getting raped and don't resist, then to me, it's not rape. I feel bad for her, but still. End quote. However, the tweets weren't just heinous dispatches from nowhere. They were each sent from a time, a place, and yeah, I'm saying it, a dumb teenager with their name attached to it all. Alexandria knew these digital footprints wouldn't stay for long, so she started collecting.
And, I'm going through, I'm doing screenshots. I've got a notebook beside me, taking notes, dragging lines out to who is associated with who. And my brain, when I see things, I'm looking at it logically and remembering little tidbits of information like, I remember seeing this name. And so I would flip back and start looking at their tweets to see what they were saying. So I was just, basically networking out from the inside out to see who all was there and who all was discussing it because every person leaves a breadcrumb. And back then, Twitter was a lot different to capture than it is now.
Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yes, it wasn't threaded like it is now.
That's right.
Yeah. So you're clicking on individual tweets. And so I was literally up all night into the following afternoon capturing information from Twitter. And after I had gone through probably the top 10 of the football team and had found all of this stuff, I started going out on their networks and identifying people that were at the parties and some of the girls that were there and capturing that. So, they were all actively in real time discussing the rape.
Right. And you were putting that timeline together.
Yeah.
Because they were basically giving you everything you were looking for.
Yes, everything. And I didn't have to geolocate. They were telling where they were at.
Yeah, they were using it almost as a group text, it felt like.
Yeah, they were.
Wild.
Yeah. So, after I'd started going through all of the kids and their networks, back then, people were using message boards and forums a lot. And so I started looking around for local forums, and I found one that was dedicated to nothing but high school football in the area. I could not believe some of the things that these people were saying. The gentleman who ran the Steubenville High School website, rollredroll.com, was in there saying some absolutely horrible things. They were blaming her for, trying to ruin the football team and talking about she wasn't really raped. It was some really, really ugly stuff in there that was all adults in the area. So, I was even more disgusted then because I'm like, what is going on here? How can people just sit around and make some of the comments that they are? This is a young girl.
With all this digital evidence in tow, her timeline of that night nailed down, and a healthy amount of rage, Alexandria wrote her first blog post on the case. But it wasn't her first time writing something like this. Alexandria had been blogging for a long time.
It's very ancient, probably seriously when the internet started, long time ago. I just always wrote about true crime cases, and over the years, there's been, different variations of blog names, and I chose the worst blog name in the world, and now I'm kind of stuck with it.
Can you tell the listeners what that name is?
Yes, it's prettyfied.com, and that actually started as a joke. A hater made a comment, because I used to go by Princess, and they said, oh, Prinny did it, and so I co-opted their insult and turned it into a domain just to be a jerk, and now I'm stuck with it.
I kind of love that. Taking it back.
Yeah. I wrote about the crime, and I started posting screenshots because, the news was trying to portray this as one way, and that wasn't the way that it was. This wasn't just two high school boys who had raped a young girl from across the river. This was two high school boys who raped a girl who had others there with them, and 100 kids who were basically internet accomplices because they knew about it in real time, and yet they did nothing to help the girl. Instead, they, demeaned her and spread it on to other kids so that they could all make fun of her online real time. And so that was the basis of my post was, this is awful. And to me, I saw that this was a culture and something that, because of their position in the community and because of how the community glorified them, this was a huge issue. And later on, I had women who had contacted me that said they had been raped 20, 30 years ago in pretty much the same way that this went down. I mean, I definitely believe that it was something that was accepted, and I just was outraged.
And as it goes, so were her readers. In the ensuing days, Alexandria posted again and again, drawing further attention to the story. And with that came a ton of conversation in the comments. And I think we all know how active an internet comment section can be. Is active the right word? Yeah, probably not. Anyway, unlike rollredroll.com, this was a place created by someone concerned for Jane Doe and fighting for her. It provided a space for others to do the same.
Steubenville is also a place where there is a social hierarchy. So it's who you know is how you navigate the town. So if you are down on the lower echelon of the totem pole, your life isn't going to be so easy. But if you're up here, cruising along with the cool people and the people who have football player kids, that's pretty cool. And so people don't really talk a lot there because if you're down here on the lower echelon, the people on the upper echelon can make your life a little bit miserable. And so there's kind of this thing that you just don't talk. It's Italian, omerta, you keep your mouth shut. And so they started finding my blog, because there was a lack of information out there from the media. So they came to my blog and, there were thousands of comments, so many that I couldn't even read them all. They just got approved and people were communicating on my blog. And that was the place, basically the community water cooler, that they came to talk because they could use a pseudonym and not identify themselves so that they would be harassed in town.
She described her blog as the new water cooler for discussion on the case, for better and worse, because eventually the family of one of the kids mentioned in her posts sued for defamation.
They sued me and 25 commenters from my blog. And, the majority of them were local, and their hope was that they could identify who these people were. I didn't care what they said about me, but I was concerned about the people that lived in Steubenville who were commenting on my blog. And, if they would have been revealed, they would have had a hard time. And so at that time, my attorneys were like, we can file a motion to dismiss based on jurisdiction because you're not even in Ohio. And my thoughts at that time were, well, if I'm dismissed out, then I have 25 people swinging in the wind that are still being sued. And, they have a right to their opinion. And so I told them I didn't want them to dismiss me out. And I said, can we talk to the ACLU? Because I think this is important. They're trying to silence speech. And so my attorneys talked to the ACLU and they agreed to represent all of the John Doe defendants. And about a week and a half, 2 weeks after the ACLU did their press release that they were representing all of the John Does, the plaintiffs dropped the lawsuit and asked if their son could post an apology on my blog.
Wow.
Yeah.
How did that go?
Well, at first, he did not make mention of Jane Doe. And I sent it back to my attorneys and they're like, seriously, Alex? I was like, no, this isn't about me. He also insulted Jane Doe. And I think that he should have to apologize to her as well. And so, reluctantly, they're like, all right, but I just was like, no, I don't care if he apologizes to me. It's not what this was ever about. And so he wrote his apology and I posted it on the blog.
That's awesome. That you fought for her.
Yeah.
In that moment.
Well, she deserved it.
And ironically, this lawsuit only attracted more attention to what was going on in Steubenville. Soon, this story of sexual assault would explode into a wider conversation on free speech, hitting newspapers and televisions from coast to coast. Hey girl, Babbel is back. Or should I say, oh, molto bene, como stai?
Hola, mi amiga. Here's the thing, fam. For most of us, learning a second language in high school or college wasn't exactly the high point of our academic careers.
No.
I also tried post-college. I've been saying this forever. I took in-person Spanish classes. I was writing flashcards and flashcard
I
up
know.
to my neck. It's not a process that works.
Yeah, I was the same way. I tried and nothing stuck. But now, thanks to Babbel, Babbel is a language learning app that sold more than 10 million subscriptions. And it's fun and it's easy.
But let me tell you why it's easy. Babbel is all about their 15-minute lessons that make it a perfect way to learn a new language on the go. For me, these Spanish classes were like 90 minutes. You're hot, you're tired,
Right.
You're thirsty. It doesn't work. These 15-minute bite-sized lessons have worked for me better than anything else I've ever used.
Yeah, and it's also not boring.
No.
Because in addition to the lessons, which are great and fun and cute,
Yeah.
but you can access podcasts,
Yes.
games, videos, stories, and if you want to take a live class, you can take a live class.
Also, Babbel's speech recognition technology helps you improve your pronunciation and accent. That is key. That's like a major part of the whole thing.
Yeah, and the thing is, other learning apps use AI for their lesson
Yeah.
plans. That's artificial intelligence.
Yeah, that's
but
fake, everybody.
Yeah, artificial. It's right in the name. But Babbel lessons were created by over 100 language experts, real people.
Yes, I've been working on the Spanish. I'm very proud of myself. Right now, fam, you can save up to 60% off your subscription when you go to babbel.com/women.
That's babbel.com/women for up to 60% off your subscription.
Babbel, language for life.
Aww.
Adios.
Pronto. That's what you say when you answer the phone in Italy.
Pronto.
Pronto. Now, let me rewind a little bit. Prior to getting sued, Alexandria tried sharing this story with as many people as possible, especially outside of Steubenville. She enlisted a reporter from the Cleveland Plain Dealer to cover Jane Doe's story. She did interviews. She even shot Nancy Grace a few emails. But it wasn't until Alexandria and her fellow 25 commenters got sued that the national media took notice. This turned the story into something bigger, something the New York Times would come to cover. The Steubenville, Ohio rape case was no longer just that. It was the latest and greatest case study in a country that, let's be honest, loves a routine free speech debate.
And so the majority of my interviews that we did, we were talking about the implications of free speech and people trying to silence speech with these slap suits, suing people trying to shut protected speech up. I mean, there are limits on free speech, but I don't think anybody during that time that was discussing this case, calling these kids monsters, they weren't acting like good kids. And so, I think basically back then my headspace was that I was floored that it got as much attention as it did and that it had gone international. And I was happy that, it was a moment that rape culture could be defined and that people would understand what that was and that it wasn't, some ugly hippie feminist word anymore. I remember that somebody sent me a video clip during Hurricane Sandy coverage that Channel 9 interrupted it to let their viewers know that I had been sued for defamation. So that's the kind of coverage that they were doing about, Prinny. But they really weren't. They weren't doing the job of a journalist. The local media wasn't. And so the international journalist community stepped in and did it for them.
Before the lawsuit was settled, Alexandria and some other supporters of hers took to Twitter. At one point, someone started hashtagging free speech and anonymous in connection with the case, because she and these anonymous commenters had their speech muzzled for a time. And this is where things take an unexpected turn. Anonymous, the global network of online activists, caught wind of the story and got involved too. And to be clear, the name of the group is actually called Anonymous. Yeah, I know, it sounds confusing, so here's Alexandria to explain who they are and what they do.
They're activists. And so Anonymous is basically, there's no hierarchy, there's no structure. It's just people who feel compelled to get out there and do some online activism and, try to make the world a better place. And some of them do some not so great things, like, they hacked Sony, they've hacked PayPal. Some of them didn't even hack. They tried to show companies that, hey, you have a security issue here. I did a penetration test, and then the company turns around and calls the DOJ, and they get in trouble and go to prison. So it's just a large collective of individuals who want to be involved. And once they got involved, they created, I believe it was Op Steubenville and Op Roll Red Roll. And what happened is, once they got involved and started their op, the high school had an unofficial football site, rollredroll.com. And so they guessed the password to the football site, which was Roll Red Roll. So they didn't even hack it. So then they got into the control panel of the website and they defaced it, which, a lot of times Anonymous will do this, and they'll put a video up with the guy in the Guy Fawkes mask. We do not forgive, we do not forget. Well, they defaced the website, and I think they had transferred the domain somewhere so that the person who owned it couldn't get back in it. And that's when the feds got involved. It was insane how many people were, hashtagging and retweeting those two hashtags. I mean, it was crazy to watch.
Their next step was scheduling rallies in Steubenville, supporting Jane Doe and all survivors of sexual assault who'd not been able to share their stories. Alexandria says word spread like wildfire. And even though she couldn't attend, being in California, she said watching from afar as it happened was special. Even more special was watching the footage that made it into the 2018 documentary on this case, called Roll Red Roll.
There were several people that were live streaming, but there were a couple thousand people who came to Steubenville and were on the courthouse steps and filling the parking lot and almost spilling out into the street. And that part of the documentary, it's like I could see the film 50 million times. But as soon as they start showing all the women standing there and, people going up on the steps, taking the microphone, and some of them for the first time had never in their entire lives talked about what had happened to them. And, there were so many, and even men that had gotten up there and talked about, being sexually assaulted. For me, it was such a powerful moment that, these people were able to get up there, take the mask off, because they all had come in masks. They were afraid they would be targeted by police if they were local, and, just to see that they were taking their masks off. So that was kind of a profound moment too. And, I described it as it was like a release to watch them to get up there and to finally have the courage enough and be empowered by other people who had been through similar situations and to be able to say it out loud. So it was almost, watching these people free themselves of these chains that had bound them for all of these years. So, it was beautiful. And like I said, every time I see that part of the documentary, I get choked up because it is truly a beautiful moment in time.
Yeah. Do you feel comfortable talking about your personal journey as a survivor yourself?
Yeah. I didn't used to. When I talked about that on the documentary, that was, my brothers saw the film. They had no clue. There were a lot of people that I never told about what happened. And so, again, we go back to that freeing moment where I publicly disclose that, that happened to me too.
Yeah. So how did you get to a place where you did feel comfortable?
I don't know. There are still times when people will ask me about it and I get choked up because I don't think that's something that you can ever stuff down inside of you. And I'm somebody that kind of, will lock things away in a box and then not think about it. And so all of this kind of made me have to take that box out and look at it again. And so I think that also helped with the healing. And, like I said in the film, my sexual assault has never defined me because he raped me, But going through this journey, you see how the public, how they still think about rape. There's this negative connotation on the person who is raped. and not the person who perpetrated the rape. But, it was healing in a sense that I was able to say publicly that I had been raped and not say, no, that's never happened to me, because there's that sense of shame that people who have been raped carry around with them. And, I grew up in southern West Virginia, and I don't even think I told my best friend at that time what had happened. And, there again is going back to the shame. And that after I saw all of the women and men who had gotten up there and talked about it, that, I didn't have to really focus or put so much focus on that shame. I mean, for me, speaking personally, it's not even the act of the assault, but it's what you walk away with afterward. And it's not even like you're dealing with, you hate that person for what they did, but then you also have this self-reckoning of grappling with that shame, because society has put such an emphasis on we shouldn't get raped. Or what did you do that got you raped? And so I think that was probably all of that, and just being able to come to grips with that I don't have to hold on to that shame, because I didn't do anything that I should be ashamed of.
Hey, girl.
Hey, girl.
Guess what? This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp.
Yes, BetterHelp.
Look, we all know life can be overwhelming. I'm feeling overwhelmed this minute, actually.
Totally.
And so many people are burned out even thinking about it. So symptoms can include lack of motivation.
Yes.
Hi. Feeling helpless or trapped? Raising my hand. Detachment, fatigue, so many things.
And the thing is, fam, we associate burnout with work, but that's not the only cause. Any of our roles in life can lead us to feel burnout. We're talking family, we're talking kids, we're talking husbands, we're talking coworkers.
Or just like your calendar.
I know.
The fact that I have things to do tomorrow
know.
sometimes can be a little bit much. And so BetterHelp Online Therapy wants to remind you to prioritize yourself.
Yes. By the way, therapy is the best thing I ever did.
I think everyone on earth should be in therapy.
It straightens out my brain in a way nothing else does, not even talking to you, though that really helps too.
It does help. You know when you're talking to a friend and
Yes.
you're having a conversation and then you are talking about something you didn't even plan on talking
Completely.
about? Do that in therapy
Yes.
and unlock some things and have what they call breakthroughs.
Yes.
Welcome.
BetterHelp is customized online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist, so you don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to.
Yeah, and it's much more affordable than in-person therapy. And you can be matched with a therapist in under 48 hours. That's quick.
Yes, fam, and let the women do the work. Listeners get 10% off their first month at BetterHelp.com/do-the-work. I love that call to action.
I love that. It's on so many levels,
Yes,
right?
yes.
That's BetterHelp.com/do-the-work.
If you turn your camera off with your therapist, it's like an interactive podcast.
You know what?
Nailed it, didn't I?
That you can do in your pajamas.
Yes.
I know that you mentioned this in the film too, that you sort of wrestled with Jane Doe's best interest and worried if you were sort of dragging out this awful memory of her or exploiting her potentially while still fighting for her. So what conversations did you have with yourself about that?
It was always back and forth of, am I prolonging this? Am I re-victimizing her by continuing to speak out about this? And then trying to weigh the importance. I mean, the conversation about this was so important, but yet, I struggled with, is the conversation detrimental to Jane Doe? And I still struggle with that. But in hindsight, we're 10 years down the road in August, and this case is still out there and people are still talking about it. I mean, it made an impact. And so she's doing great. I think someone told me that she had gotten married. She finished college. So, again, in hindsight, I think that it was the right thing to do, even though, I felt really crappy sometimes doing it. But, we're still having a conversation about this and, the conversation about consent.
What do you think can be done to unravel rape culture, to dismantle it, and to recover from it after, learning everything you've learned and knowing what you've been through?
I think it starts at home. You have to start teaching kids early about, this is my body, and being comfortable enough with their parents that they can tell them if something has happened and not, make them feel ashamed or afraid to tell them. And I think also that we need to start teaching, especially young boys, about consent, and, that a maybe is not consent, that an absolute yes from both parties is consent, not, I'm going to wear her down until finally she's exasperated and it's like, oh, okay, because that's not consent either. And I think that would help dramatically because, rape is a power thing and consent is the issue. If you hear somebody joking about rape, don't be silent. Tell them that that's inappropriate. Shame them if you have to. But, adults already have their core values and how they think. And, as a community, if people start holding others accountable for some of the garbage that they say when it comes to sexual crimes, maybe they'll start being a little more thoughtful before they let trash fly out of their mouth.
After speaking her mind on this story, Jane Doe's and hers, Alexandria is back to finding herself on the page. She writes every day and has been for quite some time. She told me her crime blogging blossomed from journaling, actually. Her daily writing practice became more investigative as she grew up, her curiosity leading the way.
As soon as I was able to hold a pen or pencil in my hand, I was writing. In kindergarten, I could read and I could write. And I've just always, my entire life, journaled or written. And, with my interest in true crime, once the internet came about, and I'm aging myself here, but I also saw that, it was a platform to write about cases. And, back when I started writing about true crime, that's the days of LiveJournal and MySpace and Dead Journal. They didn't call them blogs back then. I had a journal, online journal, and I was writing about cases. I write to this day. I write every single day. I have a pen in my hand, and I have weird calluses on my finger from doing it.
Her legal interest started in childhood, too, setting her up for the kind of thinking she'd later use piecing together cases. From a young age, she was motivated to find out the truth.
Well, I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, and my very first job, I worked for an attorney. I was 15 years old, and I worked after school and on the weekend, and he basically trained me like I was his law clerk rather than a secretary. And he used to hand me what used to be, back in the ancient days, before everything was digital, the Ohio opinion slips for Court of Appeals and Ohio Supreme Court. And so he would make me choose a case every quarter that these came out, and I would basically have to brief it for him and explain to him why the court ruled the way that they did based on the evidence that was presented to them. So I was always really a very curious kid, and my mindset was everything had to be logical. So I looked at everything in my worldview that I have to put it together so that I understand how it comes together so that it makes sense. And so, of course, I loved the law. I have all these years, I've continued legal work, and, I just have always been fascinated, not with the crime themselves, but the process, the judicial process. And then when you start looking at the peripheral characters around the criminal and how they came to the place that, that they came to be. So I think that, I've always held those interests, and then being from Steubenville and seeing this case and then knowing how the locals treated high school football players, like all of my education and past experiences kind of all came together and created a shitstorm.
But the best kind of shitstorm.
Yeah.
And to commemorate this glorious shitstorm, Alexandria got a tattoo on the inside of her wrist that I think sums things up quite nicely.
It just says Semper Veritas, which means always the truth. And, I was in California at the time, and I felt like I wanted something to memorialize that journey that I'd been on. And, the whole time I was going through this, I'm being called a liar and I'm making up things. And, to me, it was like, no, it was always about getting the truth out. And so that was why I got the tattoo.
To help advocate for victims in stories like these, taking a page out of Alexandria's book is a good start. Dismantle rape culture by talking about it. And better yet, bring that discussion to the wider communities in your life that could benefit from it. Involved in high school or college sports? Check out rollredrollfilm.com and click the resources tab for discussion guides and more. Like all quests for justice and the truth, keep the conversation going. Let the Women Do the Work is a production from the Obsessed Network, and it's produced by Becca DiGregorio, Natalie Grillo, Patrick Hines, and me, Gillian Pensavalle. Our editor and mixer is Jennifer Swatek. Follow me on Twitter @Gillian with a G, and remember, just let the women do the work.
So every big game when they would do whatever they do, I just would, roll up my eyes in the back of my head, because I have a problem with that. If you know me and I'm sitting talking to you, I have a problem sometimes with my facial expressions.
Oh, same.
Yeah. Sometimes it's really hard for me to not, ditch the eyes into the back of my head.